Eventually the padding stops when Tom knocks on an apartment door, and when Maddie opens it, he enters carrying a blanketed bundle close to his chest. He eventually asks for smelling salts, and she's of course worried about him because apparently there's a cut on his forehead from the broken window. There's more redundant dialogue after this as he talks a lot. Eventually it says Sonic's been fading and now his breathing's getting more shallow, but it's so arbitrary I'm just confused. I just see right through it as another shortcut to making people forgive him for being a thief and stuff through their feelings. Maddie's eyes widen at seeing him, but she keeps a good handle on her emotions and instead instantly shifts into doctor mode, instead of freaking out, which is more relatable than Tom's over-the-top screaming at him. I just can't relate to screaming at something like that when it doesn't mean something bad's happened or it's going to happen. After it's boring for a while, just recapping stuff and stating the obvious, eventually it says she had cleaned and bandaged the wounds that I didn't even know he had gotten, so they failed at their job for the audience. At least I can say that for the novel. I don't know if that's true for the film. The smelling salts wake him up, and he says gotta go fast right away, which is forced. It's nice of it to reference Sonic X for the fans. He also has no reason to spin around the room and ricochet off the ceiling and fridge and rest on top of a bookshelf just because of the smell. Then after his boring dialogue, it says that he sidled up next to Maddie's leg. How did he do that when he was still atop a bookshelf? So he must have forgotten to describe him getting off it. It's good that she's written to jump a little from that, because it's realistic. It would have been dumb if she kept showing no strong emotion about seeing an alien. He naturally has no social skills, so he calls her the nickname he came up with, and it's weird that he asks, right? When he's been spying on her for a long time, which is why he called her that. It's good of him to say, good dude you got here, but it's not just to be nice. He'd also say it no matter what to get her on his side. I like that Tom corrects him about her name. After patting, he asks if he's okay when he clearly is, even though his breath was getting shallower before. But just being woken up magically healed him. After some patting, finally he gets nicknamed against his will, being called a hedgehog. He agrees to take a rest and waste my time, and Maddie leads Tom out of the room. Thankfully, after some filler words, she acknowledges how under control she's been. After rephrasing what she already said, they fist bumped. I've never seen a couple do that before, so that's sweet. It means they're good friends as well. She then wastes my time and finally screams the reaction she'd actually have to him. She'd have to be pretty far away for him not to hear her. It's good that she made that mistake even if it never backfires. So she's not a Mary Sue. Just close. I'll wait until after the novels to judge, because it's normal for a character you're supposed to like to take a while to show a flaw or mess up, when they're not even main characters, since most characters are one-dimensional. I think her being protective of raccoons who topple as trash cans is flawed, but that's subjective, and it wasn't made clear who we were supposed to agree with, so it'd be down to assume the narrative was definitely on one side. I think it's more likely to be on her side, though. The story has Tom explain things to her, so we get to see the exact dialogue that results from it. It's a bit boring, but it'd be even more boring to just skip past the conversation that you would have looked forward to. I just wish the conversation went faster. It's shockingly nice of her to be upset that he had tranquilized Sonic. There's nothing but patting after this for a while. It's good that the narration finally tells me that he's her husband. Then eventually she supports him because it's good to help people. It's compassionate of her to admit that aliens are people too, though her even questioning it was bad. Tom shows humility, saying that he doesn't deserve her and kisses her cheek. Even this wouldn't be allowed in IDW, which shows how stupid Sega's excuse for that is. After this is nothing but boring padding for quite a while. It's explained that Tom was allowed to get inside the Transamerica building because he flashed a police badge so he could get inside the elevator. And after that it goes back to padding for a while with pointless dialogue. At least Tom was being nice by reassuring Maddie. It keeps wasting my time not progressing the plot. You'd think that a woman being freaked out that a kid's in Tom's bag would matter because cops would come after him. But it never happened, so it would have been better if that jarringly dark joke wasn't there. Tom asks Sonic what was with that crazy lightning display earlier, when it should have been obvious to him that it happens because of how emotional he got about isolation because he was being emotional and was like, oh no. I'd expect him to be smarter than this. Eventually Sonic said he'd been light crying at the baseball field. So Tom reassures him needlessly long-windedly that he doesn't have to struggle alone with his feelings. And that combined with its predictability made me repelled by how low effort it seems to come up with as a writer. I'm mostly wondering why they didn't have this conversation as soon as he found out he caused the blackout. What's confusing about what Tom said is that Sonic still plans on going to the Mushroom Planet after this. Won't saying to Sonic that you don't have to struggle alone with your feelings mean you can live with me now? He's gonna be struggling alone with his feelings if he goes to the Mushroom Planet, which Tom knows is his plan. What Sonic said makes it pretty clear that he's gonna go crazy if he goes to the Mushroom Planet. Why won't he try to stop him? There's redundant dialogue from Sonic, where it's meant to make you laugh because Sonic said a certain word and Tom laughing at it was a laugh track. After patting, Tom says he's not meant for just breaking stuff. This has to have been written to tell Sonic once and for all that he reminds him of his adoptive mother to explain why he'll change his mind after his plan. After Tom's long-winded blathering that just reiterates what he already said, the narration doesn't have Sonic confirm that he reminded him of Longclaw. So the writer trusted the audience to figure that out for themselves. Sonic thanks him for what he said and for saving him, and they hug. Tom opens the door to the roof. The rings shine brightly from the sun. I think that's a new one, and emphasizes how magical they are. Sonic merely walks towards them instead of running, which is only justified if you assume he doesn't want to go to the Mushroom World and is stalling. Why doesn't Tom pick up the hint and start trying to convince him? He starts shimmering with light blue energy because of his nervousness, and at least that's new for this series. But again, it's not something I love, and it's not better than the games. Neither is him being alone most of his life, because it clearly had him turn out even more immature and socially inept. I'm just so bored. He pulls the bag over to him and holds a ring, and after redundant dialogue, the ring starts to glow, only for a swarm of drones to burst up over the ledge, scattering glass and rubble across the roof, and saving Sonic from making the biggest mistake of his life. So thanks, Eggman. You were literally the hero of this movie. That's how you get him wrong. Like, he was harsh, he put Tom in danger, but he was just doing his job, and Tom wasn't even allowed to be in the truck with Sonic. After some redundant narration, a massive egg-shaped airship with blades and bombs flies over Sonic with Eggman wearing the control harness. What's that supposed to mean? Eggman tells him not to leave without saying goodbye, and says, and I quote, "Not when I find myself so attracted to you." I know he's making a pun, but he'd never ever say that, because he'd know people would notice the double entendre. The narration says he was in full supervillain mode, as if he wasn't before, his red jacket moving in the wind. Tom steps between Eggman and Maddie, and surprisingly prepares for a fight. That was dumb, because he should know he'd just get killed, and the idea that he'd go from saying Sonic goes to town nothing, to wanting to sacrifice his life for someone who was looking forward to getting rid of a Sonico is so forced. After he tells Sonic to run, Sonic refuses, and confusingly, he runs into Tom and Maddie as hard as he could, which logically would kill them, so stop lying, narrator. He says sorry at least, and then for shock value, all that's described is that he pushes them over the skyscraper's ledge, which he had no reason to think they'd survive based on all that's being described, when he could have just not done that. He could have just lifted them both under one arm each and ran to a safe place and come back in seconds. Or just done it one at a time if he was too weak. Why didn't he just go to the mushroom planet? Eggman lampshades how unexpected this nonsense was. And after redundant narration, Sonic somehow wastes precious time talking to Eggman and taunting him for 2 sentences. And Eggman wastes even more time whining about it. Eggman uses his controls, and the spinning cloud of drones twists like a tentacle. It says that, but with more words for no reason. And Sonic jumps, and after pointless narration, it says time heavily slowed down in his mind. Best case scenario, this is just to represent how he has to have fast reaction times to handle his speed. Why is he even bothering to deal with Eggman? He has nothing to gain. So the only reason you'd even care about the scene is that you know they aren't going to kill off Tom and Maddie in a kid's film. And it's also predictable that he's not going to go to the mushroom planet. There's redundant narration, and he runs up a line of drones and into the air. There's more redundant words, and his shoes push off the bots to send him spinning right under the egg-shaped machine. After redundant narration, he runs down the building, and there's a lot of pointless padding until the egg pod gets covered in blue energy from the quill. Eggman included to make it speed up. Eggman says yoo-hoo like Boom Eggman would. He's always either one awful extreme or the other. There's padding after this. He runs around the corner of the building. There's redundant narration, and Eggman's floating machine clashes with the glass. Sonic somehow feels like pumping a fist in the air because of this. After padding, the egg pod's missiles blast off and curve around the building close to Sonic. After redundant narration padding, he starts crisscrossing the building and leads a missile into the waters of the bay. Sonic spins around and runs at the other missile to jump over it and tap a toe on his end to kick it far into the bay where it explodes. The last missile catches up to him at the top of the building, and Sonic leads it straight towards Eggman, who somehow isn't intimidated. After padding, Eggman says he can see everything after being powered up with Sonic's power, even though Sonic can't. And he says he'll be able to destroy everything worthless in the world, which he reveals to me is literally everything. Making me wish it was explained how he turned out like this. And he says he'll rebuild a flawless world as his god, even though Sonic doesn't have that power. And if he thinks everything's worthless, then there's no way he could rebuild a flawless world out of worthless materials. And he would have just done it already if he could. The only way these lines could make sense would be if he was lying to taunt them. Because if he was really that powerful, he'd be attacking him directly, instead of him going super, being totally forgettable. Because I didn't even know this was gonna happen, and I've listened to reviews of this. After Sonic fails to actually react to what he said anyways, he jumps aside as the missile hits the cloud of drones and makes an explosion, turning them to ash, while the force of it kicks Sonic off his feet. After redundant narration and dialogue, it turns out Sonic's in free fall off the building, which is cathartic after what he did. At least now Sonic's taking him seriously. The street rushed up to his face, and he grabs a loose ring and wastes precious time taunting Eggman that he's never seen power like this, which is totally not a villain thing to say, and he uses a warp ring to fall through it. Eggman pursues him through it, and it's cathartic to see him ask what those are. After padding, it turns out Sonic's been sent to Paris. He runs through the streets, and after redundant narration, he sniffs a baguette, which somehow is supposed to carve him up because he's magical. And he drinks a dozen shots of coffee, and pretends to be French with a beret on his head, an insensitive joke, and uses a beret to hit Eggman's face. After padding, he runs off the side of the Eiffel Tower, leaving flames behind him, which makes me wonder why this never happens before, but at least this is new. And after more redundant narration, there's another ring warp, and they fall onto the top of the Great Wall of China. Sonic crouches low and runs down it. After padding, Eggman's missiles keep getting destroyed by blue energy waves, so at least that's new. I like that Sonic's visiting these places because he wanted to earlier. He reaches into his bag and sees only 3 rings and states the obvious, and thinks of the next place. They're warped to a cloud of sand kicked up by Sonic. And the pyramids of Giza tower in the distance, and Sonic spins into a ball. The lightning he discharges magically turns sand to chunks of glass, which I learned isn't actually realistic. You'd need to add something to the sand to turn it into glass. And the same goes for when he did this in STC. So he also has the magical power to conjure up whatever it takes to turn sand into glass when he's doing this, which is as believable as him running so fast. They could have just made an original character with electricity powers, but it wouldn't have been nearly as interesting, because you'd expect that. After boring dialogue from Eggman and redundant narration, a missile launches and there's worthless narration until Sonic warps again. Fire and smoke pours through the other end of the portal, and Sonic hits the ground in the heart of the Green Hills town square. The ring bag bounces into the gutter. He crawls up on his knees with the impact of the bomb having shaken him, which I guess is new. The redundant narration repeats itself a bunch, boring me with Eggman's taunting. I wonder if Sonic made sure Tom and Maddie would have a ring, and that's how they'll survive. At least the final fight scene with Eggman was good. There was variety in it. Eggman stereotypically asks Sonic for any last words, which is a lame cliche, so it always takes me out of it. He was already getting sadistic enjoyment out of this, so if he wanted to stall like this, why would I try to kill him after this when that end is fun? Sonic says "gwonk" is a word he likes, which is dissonant of the tone. And Tom and Maddie survive a fall that's described as like the drop from a tree branch times 100, which is trying to make this more realistic. But if they're not injured after this, it'll be lying. After padding, Maddie says they're in Green Hills in a barn they recognize. And she questions this, when she should have figured it out after seeing what a ring did. And Tom explains that Sonic must have tossed one of his rings under them as they fell off the building. There's no reason for the scriptwriter to not have made that clear when he pushed them off it. After some boring padding, when the scriptwriter should have known all he wanted was to see Sonic's point of view, they're at least described as having aches, so it's trying to be realistic. But it fails to be realistic because they can still sprint home. After some more boring, worthless padding, they get to Tom's cop car and hear an explosion. Why didn't it immediately go back to Sonic? Eventually, after padding, the cop car launches over a curb and crashes into the egg pod. The redundant narration bores me, and Eggman flies from his seat to the ground. It at least tries to be realistic, and then airbag hits Tom in the face. After padding, he jumps out of the car and is boring again until Tom punches Eggman. I wish it explained where he hit him. For no reason, Tom is lifted from this and flips over and lands in the dirt next to a smiling Sonic who states the obvious, and thankfully apologizes for pushing him off a skyscraper. Tom says with a laugh that if he had to do it, that was the best way, which is so forced after the terrifying experience he put him through. It sure is a good thing that when he warped with the ring while falling at terminal velocity, it slowed down his fall by a lot all in 1 second, without that sudden stop killing him. So it's a good thing he used a magic ring, so I can explain away that part of the magic of these warp rings is giving you protection from fall damage, and rings are supposed to protect you. What's confusing is that they still got hurt, so the ring is there to protect them from getting even more hurt, like in Tails' Adventure. Eggman bores me for a while, but he is correct that friends make you irrational. He always had a good point in his love of machinery, but it's also irrational of him to say this, because it should know he's so unlikable that no one besides the insane Agent Stone would ever be his friend. And because they're so similar, I just had to assume he was that way because he's just like Eggman, but doesn't have the confidence to act like him instead of being a fanboy. Eggman saying he doesn't have friends explains why he didn't bring Agent Stone along, when he'd have nothing to do anyways. It's good that Agent Stone didn't accompany him, since that'd be even more boring dialogue to pad out the story. That'd be said the same unlikable way as Eggman did to Tom. All you have to do is think for a second to know why they didn't do the more cliche expected thing of having him around just for the meta reason that he'd be around longer. I'm glad a battery gets thrown in Eggman's head. I assume for all the property damage they knew he caused, which wasn't really described in the book. What was the point of describing it as a D battery? Tom sees an army of Green Hill citizens led by the same conspiracy theorists who used to try capturing Sonic, which seems cathartic at first. Somehow, a whole army of people who didn't believe about Sonic agreed to follow him here to find Sonic. A few would want to go with him out of curiosity and sadism and a lack of anything better to do. But that many people, it's insanely forced. It's just running on uninspired meta-logic just like Colors, because they're just to incite feelings in the audience, and only impressing them if they checked their brain out the door at the start of the movie, because they have no respect for Sonic story-wise anymore, so the standards were in hell. I had no standards at all when I read Penders' stories, and I still hated his first story. And wasn't all the damage Eggman did on a road on the way out of the town? I guess the reason they're all here is because they were mad at Tom's house being damaged. How did they know that Tom's house was the one that was damaged? I guess Carl knew where he lived, and so he told everyone. I guess Tom's neighbors spread the word on social media. So that's why they're all here. And then they found out from more social media that Eggman's earlier fight with Sonic caused some damage on a road. Maybe there were some witnesses. Anyways, it's nice that Carl says that's our sheriff you're messing with. Because it's sweet, and it drives the point home to Tom. It's satisfying that he gets to point out that Sonic's real after all. After padding, Eggman somehow swivels the controls on his glove to turn on the egg pod. After 2 sentences of padding, Eggman says he's authorized by the government to eliminate threats to his investigation and replace them with robots if he feels like it. So it's smart of him to use his leverage against them that they might not have known about. It explains why Sonic's necessary. Sonic crosses Eggman's face in a blur to leave him spinning like in Sad AM. There's more boring padding. It's good that he tells this jerk he thought he was so smart but played himself. Sonic speeds from spot to spot. We don't need Sonic to lecture him that he thought he could steal his power and bend the world to his will. This really is written for morons. He says it doesn't work like that, and chaos doesn't get controlled, even though Sonic's controlled it in this story. So there's no reason to think it makes sense to write this as being a real rule and not Sonic lying to him. And people do bend the world to their will within Archie and Fleetway, because one Emerald's got infinite power. The characters in the series with Chaos powers have such a huge variety of abilities with them. How has that conclusion come to you that bending the world to your will wasn't a possible one of them? If this is all that's going to be used out of Eggman getting blue energy covering him, it's not worth it. And it's no wonder that it was forgettable. Eggman gets called Robotnik again, although I don't see the point of doing the reference again. And he has a perfect reaction because he screams in that one-word sentences in order to stop saying that, which is cathartic. If Eggman ever did react to that name in past continuities, it must have been forgettable and unsatisfying, because I don't remember that. Sonic's quills charge up increasingly faster, and his body radiates blue light, and he keeps spinning around Eggman as his body keeps looking like it's morphing into a yellow flame. While looking past that yellow energy, Tom sees something and runs for it. Sonic says chaos doesn't have to mean destruction, because the scriptwriters cater into the imaginary people who'd be too dumb to have already learned that, or know that all along. At least this is telling the people in front of him that he's a good guy. But the Captain Obvious S-up is the lamest one of all. The movie shoves this extremely obvious already lesson down your throat, even though Sonic isn't the type to go on lectures for several sentences about the immorality of someone's actions. The real problem is stopping the pacing. He doesn't just immediately start acting. This is cringeworthy padding that comes out of nowhere. Eventually he says that his purpose is to introduce a little mayhem into somebody's life, because the random ride can bring people closer. I know! Anybody who complained about the I am Shadow the Hedgehog speeches in Shadow the Hedgehog has no right to defend this. Why is that too cheesy and not this? After some more cheesy dialogue and redundant narration, Tom agrees and lamely calls the teenager his friend yet again, and throws the ring sack at Sonic. Eggman bores me, but it's satisfying that there's fear in his eyes. He looks so stupid for even bothering to threaten him at this point. I like Sonic responding to his threat like a deadpan snarker. Yeah, that's gonna be a hard pass for me. Here's my counteroffer. But it's a little confusing coming from movie Sonic. He was hardly ever snarky in this way before. He catches the bag and pulls out the last ring and spades into an electric tornado. I wish he had delivered his message while he was doing this. It's convenient for Eggman that in this universe, Sonic running around someone to make a blue tornado for so long doesn't cause suffocation like an Archie from the Vortex. I assume because Sonic isn't trying to do that to him. The warp ring hovers and shows the Mushroom World. Sonic bursts out of his whirlwind supercharged and furious at Eggman, like the bare minimum requires of Sonic. Sonic claps and throws a ring at Eggman to send him to the Mushroom World. It's annoying that the chapter ends while interrupting itself right before this happens to him, because it stops the pacing. A shockwave of blue lightning vanishes. Whenever I made shockwave one word, it got underlined. But the editor didn't catch that. Won't every editor use spell check? I'm just bored because the rest of the sentence is redundant with what's earlier. Sonic collapses from exhaustion for no reason, and Tom runs to him to pick his head up, and he's not breathing for some reason. The story's so lame that it even tries to fake out death scene. Why bother when we'll see through it? With so many knee-jerk emotional response creators, it's no wonder people were shallow enough to think he was a good character. After some melodramatic padding, it takes just a few lines for Sonic to talk to him again. And what he says is just bragging about having better style. Why did he cough? His breathing returns to normal and he opens his eyes. And the whole town is described as cheering. This is so lame. First off, most of them would still be freaked out on Alien regardless of whose side he's on. Because people can still hate two people at once. But that's an acceptable break from reality. And second, there's no way the whole town would be here. A few of those people would be in comas in the hospital, for example. I'm taking this as exaggerating narration that's not canon, because most of them would have jobs to be at. Tom humbly admits that Sonic's right. I always wonder why he's being lenient with him. And why is he saying they need to get him some pants? After some worthless narration, it says that now Sonic can visit anywhere in town he wants, which is satisfying after the beginning. It makes it more relatable by saying that he likes getting a double cheeseburger from not Burger King. They reference Olive Garden in the movie by name, but cowered it out with Burger King? I don't get it. Anyways, the UK continuity's already established that Sonic likes cheeseburgers. It would have been better if it said he got McDonald's chicken nuggets. It also says he's made a habit of going to Crazy Carl's anytime he needed to borrow something. That's not good of him. And why Carl? The one he bothered the most. I always respected that the movie had the guts to call him Crazy Carl the whole story, instead of thinking it'd be too mean or something to call conspiracy theorists crazy. If it's been debunked, it's a conspiracy theory. But any time he was called Crazy Carl in the narration after the first time, the word crazy was padding. Speaking of that, there's a bunch of it, which just redundantly goes over the self-evident. Why did it say that sometimes his speed got out of control and he broke something in the town? He doesn't need to be responsible for even more bad things. After some padding, Sonic sees a big black truck in Tom's driveway, and looks in the bushes as a man in black knocks on the door looking stern, and asks for Tom. After he responds and wonders who he is, he's told he's Agent Stone. And after some padding, he says he's cleaning up ops for the Department of Defense, so certain iniquities won't repeat themselves. I just have to assume this means Eggman's boss was mad at him for not only damaging Tom's house, but trying to attack his vehicle while it was driving, when that could have hurt someone else's. It being too vague made this look confusingly convenient to a few people, because Eggman did his job. He hands Tom a package as an olive branch for keeping quiet. There's more padding where Tom stupidly asks if they ever found any trail of Eggman. when he saw Sonic warp him to another world? Why does it bother lying to him that Eggman never existed? Tom cathartically wishes he wasn't lying, and gets asked if he's been in contact with Sonic, because the American government would love to have a chat and some brunch with him. Tom plays ignorant about this, which is a smart thing to do just in case. Agent Stone wisely drops it, and wastes my time before driving away. Sonic goes inside and makes himself a bag of popcorn, and puts his feet on the couch. Tom whines about him being there while coming in from the garage and says he doesn't knock. It's surprisingly good writing they did to dump Sonic immediately like I expected when I heard he did that. Instead, it's realistic. He kept letting him have movie nights with him as a friend, so it took longer than that for him to warm up to the idea. Sonic explains that he thought it was guys' night, and gets told he came here too late. He wouldn't be late. Sonic's told it's time for him to go back to his cave. And after some padding, Tom says he didn't mean that cave. What did he expect him to think he meant? He wouldn't have said it's time for him to go back to his cave if that's not what he meant. Tom leads him up the stairs to a door that had been locked for weeks. He wastes my time before saying that if he was going to stay in this town just because Sonic made it less boring, even though he didn't, he wants to keep his partner within arm's reach, but he's not his partner, because he doesn't stay with him when he's on duty. Sonic being in town doesn't change the fact that he has nothing exciting to do all day, so that's not why he stayed. He stayed to humor Sonic because he whined at him about moving, and I don't appreciate being lied to by the film. This was just easily swept under the rug to humor Sonic, who had no reason to be overly attached to one town over any other on an alien world. Why did Tom ask him if he was here without knocking, if he wanted him to live with him? Tom opens the door to a bedroom for Sonic, as I predicted as soon as he said he didn't mean that cave. The walls are filled with his posters. He should have known those were stolen. He should have asked him where he got them and returned them and bought replacements for him. The only point of making him a cop was to make it easy for him to get into that building. People said it was tone deaf in today's climate. Couldn't Sonic have just carried Tom and Maddie past security and gone to the roof? So he should have been a cop, because it doesn't reflect well on him that he's making an exception for Sonic. He's only against theft when it's done by people he doesn't like. That's why a boombox is propped on a desk. On a shelf along the wall was the last of Longclaw's possessions salvaged from Eggman's mobile lab, and the plastic donut. After padding that just states the obvious and recaps, where I wonder why Maddie isn't here to have this moment with them. Tom reveals that the package had a radio receiver, and Sonic holds it and calls it a secret government hotline. There's padding where eventually it says the wind howled over the ocean and storms hit cliffs, and the water was rising with the tide. It wastes my time saying that the wind twisted and turned, picking up leaves and branches. There's more padding, and it says that sparks flicker, and lightning splits the air in two, and Sonic's feet lands on the ground above the cliff. And Tails says if these readings are accurate, he's here. There was no point in describing the weather before that. Why do I have scary weather if he's not evil? Then it goes to Eggman's point of view. The heat of the jungle makes dew drip off the mushrooms, and a sharp knife of repurposed metal cuts through the brush. That's a less padded out version of what the sentence said. I'm glad the jungle's hot for Eggman to suffer through. Eggman makes an audio diary using a data pad on his wrist, saying that he's been stuck here for 45 days. If it's not possible to survive on just mushrooms, that can be explained away by saying it's an alien planet. So some of the mushrooms are different from ours. There's also grass on this planet, so there's not just mushrooms when it comes to the type of life there is here. He pulls the remainder of his egg pod with vines. Not that it's explained why he's bothering. He wastes my time bragging and says they use a specially formulated mushroom diet to keep his sanity perfect. I like that it's explained that he had to find out exactly which mushrooms and how many of each to eat for a good diet. The writer cared enough to think about that at least. Skewed priorities. Eggman's never researched a variety of mushrooms and had nothing to eat but them before. And that combined with him caring about a biological thing is interesting. He pretends he's hearing Agent Stone's voice from a toadstool with shades on, and uncharacteristically thanks him and says he likes his new look too. When Sonic acts weird because of solitary confinement, it's supposed to be seen as sad and horrible. But when Eggman does, it's supposed to be just funny because he's of a lower caste than Sonic for being rude all the time. So the message wasn't that nobody should go through what Sonic did. Eggman walks ahead, and after redundant narration, it says there's still no sign of intelligent life, which he thinks is bliss, because he's got no self-awareness like someone with actual emotional intelligence would. If he actually thought this was bliss, he wouldn't have gotten lonely enough to pretend Agent Stone was talking to him. The story finally ends after he gives exposition that I already assumed, and it's a badass one-liner that he'll be home before Christmas. The pacing isn't as slow in these novels as the other books. It's usually more likely that the next line would describe something happening that matters. The novel doesn't have crap like a fart joke, or Maddie being nagged by her sister to divorce, or the Olive Garden references. So the writer did good by removing padding. He never said Sonic did the floss. It didn't go on too long after someone noticed Sonic was in a bank. Being a novel means it's got tons of worthless narration, as well as having to stop the pacing to describe scenery. But I like not having music and voice acting to emotionally manipulate me. But it still has all of the same problems as the film, which I'm not going to make a video about because the copyright system for live action stuff is evil. But I'm going to make a separate video on my thoughts about this movie, because I think all of it can apply to the movie too.